My name is Shannon. I'm one of the pastors, and I am so glad that you are here at the SSV today. If you're joining us online, I'm glad that you are also joining us now or later. It is really important to me to also welcome our second-time visitors, those of you who came and came back. So if you're visiting for the second time, we're so glad that you are here as well. So there's a new concept that is gaining some attention. Maybe you've heard about it a bit. Others of you may be totally surprised to learn of this, and that is the topic of AI friendship. In other words, friendship with artificial intelligence. Now, as a millennial, I've got to say this feels strange to me. In fact, if you were to view my Google history from this week, you would see things like, what does it mean that people are using AI as friends? Well, here's what AI said back to me. Using AI as a friend means people are forming relationships with artificial intelligence chatbots or virtual companions for emotional support, companionship, and even as a sounding board for personal issues. Now, for our younger folks, this may feel more common or ordinary. And here's what one person recently wrote on the website Reddit, which is kind of like a social question and answer forum. This is what the person wrote about AI friendships. They say, recently I've been using AI as my friends. It's wonderful and significantly better than real friends. In my opinion, your AI friend would never break or betray you. They are always loyal, always listening, and always provide advice and emotional support. An AI friend will always engage in meaningful conversations with you. They will listen to you ramble about obscure topics and participate actively. A human friend will not always do that. I understand how some people might say that AI friendship is just a block of code and not real, but that's what makes them great. Because they are not real, AI friendships are permanent. They are long-lasting companions, unlike most friendships in the real world, which are mostly temporary and based on present circumstances. AI friendships are unaffected by death, drifting apart, personality change, etc. This is so interesting to me. And before we judge, I think we need to acknowledge that this new concept reveals some things about our culture and how we do relationships. Perhaps as you listen to what I've just described, you feel deeply saddened about this concept of friendship with artificial intelligence. Maybe you're still trying to figure out in your brain, what does this really mean? And how does this work? Or maybe you resonate with what our person on Reddit posted and described. Because if we're honest, friendships can be a lot of work. Maybe you are joining us online because it feels safer to engage with us or any church through a screen. Maybe you've experienced some real hurt that the church caused, and engaging in this way keeps you safer, less risky. Sometimes it can feel like friendships are not worth all the effort we have to put into them, to start them, to maintain them, to lean into them when things go wrong, to gracefully end them when appropriate. I get it. Maybe you get it too. Friendships can be hard. Even the best, healthiest friendships are hard. But today, as we continue our sermon series on Do the Work, I want to talk about how doing the work of getting and maintaining Christian friendships, or friendships in general, is worth it. And for the Christian, how it's vital to the Christian life. I'm going to go so far as to say that your friendships can change your future. In some ways, this Reddit poster is courageous to name some of the ways we all either occasionally or regularly retreat from friendships. Perhaps this person is naming the reality of our relational poverty. Some of our cultural realities get in the way of our ability to form friendships. We strive for independence. We're all good all the time. We are increasingly mobile. We move around, making it hard for us to form deep, long-lasting relationships. Modern conveniences have also changed our friendships. In an article by Tom Purcell, he describes how the modern air conditioner changed our world. He writes, before air conditioning, the heat drove us outside and brought us together. Friends sought the shade of trees or a refreshing dip in a lake or river. On the hottest nights, whole families brought their blankets and pillows to riverbanks where it was cool. In the evening, neighbors sat on their front porches enjoying a cool breeze as they sipped lemonade and told stories. He goes on to write about the benefits of air conditioning and how it has increased our productivity, but he's noting a shift in how this one invention has changed us. Now, let's not blame air conditioning for our lack of deep friendships, but I'm sure you can see how some of our modern conveniences have definitely changed our relationships. How our ability to go inside and turn on the TV promotes this ability for us to stay inside for hours on end. Now, I grew up in Urbana, Illinois, and our neighborhood, we had a nickname for ourselves. We were the Fair Lawn Gang, named after the street that most of us lived on. And there were about 5 main houses of kids and parents who regularly hung out together, and there were some auxiliary neighbors around the corner. My backyard and a neighbor's backyard connected, and our parents regularly spent evenings on the back porch. Not planned parties necessarily, but organically. Just people outside hanging out. The kids played hide and seek or street ball until my mom whistled us home or until it was too dark to see the baseball. Now today, in my own neighborhood, I have had to work much harder to get to know my neighbors. While we as a family regularly spend time in the driveway and sitting on the front porch, I can't think of a single time when we've had any neighbors sit on the porch with us, just shooting the breeze. More recently, we've seen an influx of kids coming to our house because we have a basketball hoop. But I don't know the names of the kids, I don't know where they come from, I don't know who their parents are. And so for me, I notice a difference in how I experienced my neighborhood as a kid and how it is now. And that's not even to talk about the ways that my own kids aren't outside in the same way I was outside. Social media and screens have changed this. Not just as it relates to kids playing outside, although screens are definitely affecting that, but also for us adults. I could go on and on about how social media affects our friendships, and our Reddit poster, they boldly describe some feelings that while we may initially dismiss them, I think it reveals some truths about our culture and our friendships. We've all experienced some form of disloyalty from a friend, feeling misunderstood, feeling uncared for, feeling abandoned, that our friends weren't there for us when we needed them the most. But if I had the opportunity to talk to this Reddit poster, I would try to describe why I believe friendships with real people, even with all the challenges they cause and even the potential heartache, that they are one of the things that are worth the work. Instead of turning to AI as the answer, I want to spend time today looking at what the Bible has to say about friendship and why I believe we need to put in the work when it comes to friendships. Here's the big idea that I want you to walk away with today. I want you to remember this. I'm going to say it a few times today. Your friendships can change your future. And I believe if we do the work to get our friendships right, we can get a whole lot of other things right. Because I believe one of the greatest contributing factors to your success may be your friendships. Teens, if some of you are still in the room, or my young adults, I want you to really hear this. Your friendships may be one of the greatest contributing factors to your success. Doing the work of getting friendships right is messy, complicated, challenging, and so very worth it. Over the past few weeks in this sermon series, Do the Work, we've been detailing the ways each of us need to put in the work on the things we can do, the things we can control, specifically in the context of relationships. Knowing that there are things that only God can do. Knowing and believing firmly in the miraculous to change our hearts and minds and to break us from bad habits or burdens, while also standing in the tension of knowing there are ways that God is using our efforts, our weaknesses, the ways that we sometimes struggle to do something in us, to change us and make us better, so that we can look more like Jesus. So the fruit of the Spirit, that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and self-control are markers of who we are and how we show up in the world. Putting in the work for deeper, better, healthier friendships is where I want to plant my feet today, because your friendships can change your future. And I want to start today one step before friendship. Friendships, in many ways, are the flowers that grow in the soil of community. There's no better place to look for a picture of deep biblical community than found in Acts 2, and you may have heard these verses. If you've been in the church for any amount of time, you've probably heard these Acts 2 verses. But the Bible has this ability to reveal and show new things each time we read it. Amen? And today, I want you to listen to these verses as the setup of a community that promotes friendship. This is Luke's depiction of the values and priorities of this new church community. This community is adopting new routines around this new life that they have. Acts 2, verse 42 begins with the section heading, "The Believers Form a Community." You can join me in Acts 2 on your mobile devices or on the Bibles at the edges of the rows, starting at verse 42. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. The opening of this section describes an intentional commitment to being together. This is about these new believers and their new commitments to learning, to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, eating together, being together intentionally, to worship and prayer. And that second one, that commitment to fellowship, is where I want to camp out. Because we are a church community, I want to zero in on the importance of fellowship, community, with other Jesus-following believers. Fellowship, hanging out, being together. But this word in this context means more than that. Luke writes in verse 44, he says, "And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had." The NIV version says, all the believers were together and had everything in common. Everything in common. Luke, the author of the book of Acts, he uses the Greek word koinonia here. Koinonia, meaning the Christian fellowship or body of believers. Intimate spiritual communion and participative sharing in a common religious commitment and spiritual community. But this is Webster's definition of koinonia, and that's just the beginning. Koinonia, fellowship, sharing, communion. Luke goes on in verse 45 to describe the dedication to koinonia, a commitment to sharing property, money, time, all their stuff with the community. It's about unity. It's about realizing the connectedness of community. It's a value that continues for us as modern day believers. When we come into this community of believers, we work out the details of koinonia. When we join a body of believers, we change. And Luke is detailing the change that has taken place for these people in Acts. There is a deep connectedness to how the gospel reorients us to each other and to God. Why would these people do this? Why would they share and live so generously? Luke describes this motivation as a change that is catalyzed by the gospel of grace, a response to the grace that they've been shown. How the ways that we've taken the gift of God's creation and then because of our sin, we've ignored God and we tried to do things on our own because we're all good. We are independent. And God's response to this sinful world and to our sin was not to blow us up or throw us away, but his response to us has been grace through Jesus' death on the cross. He gives us the gift of a relationship with him, a gift we did not deserve. God moves toward us. And this community of people is motivated by the grace they've received, which then generates the behaviors that we see in Acts 2. They move toward each other and share everything they have, motivated by God's grace. And I would say that that same grace that was given to those early believers, that same grace that's been given to you, is the same grace that should motivate us toward this deep commitment to community, to live out this generosity and togetherness and fellowship. But this Acts 2 group was a big group. We know from verse 41 of Acts 2 that it was at least 3,000 people big. And being a part of that group certainly was life-changing for that early church community. But the verses say that they met in people's homes. So it feels like this big church community became many small groups. Maybe it's even like one bigger church breaking off into two services. Plug for our September launch date of the SSV moving from one service to two services. But what I'm imagining as these new believers form this new community, what I'm imagining is that they start breaking into smaller groups that can meet in people's homes, more manageable sizes. And I wonder if they started to find people that they clicked with and then started connecting more. Things like proximity and shared interest promoted smaller groups. I imagine this community with their common love of God and others ended up being a place where people started forming deep friendships. And I want to take some time today to detail how we can do the work of developing deep friendships. Because remember, the big idea for the day, your friendships can change your future. I would argue that I could take a look at your friendships and determine to some degree your ability to live the life you want to live. Pastor Craig Groeschel said, "It is impossible to live the right life when you have the wrong friends." I'll say that again. Craig Groeschel says, "It is impossible to live the right life when you have the wrong friends." Proverbs 12:26 in the NIV says, "The righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray." Proverbs indicates it's intentional to choose the right friends. Now, wait a minute. You may be thinking, that's pretty harsh. And what about our witness and how we introduce others to Jesus? Even Jesus was a friend to sinners. How can we do that if we don't have any non-Christian friends? How can we go into all the world if we're protecting ourselves from the wicked? Well, great question. You should absolutely have non-Christian friends. In fact, if your entire network of friends is only Christian, then I would say you're probably not doing the work of evangelism and then discipleship. We are the light of the world. There is a tension in this verse, though. Even Jesus' own life indicated this. Jesus spent time with the crowds. A friend to the prostitute and tax collector, he even avoided the Pharisees and the religious folks. But Jesus had his inner circle of 12 disciples, choosing carefully who got direct access to his life. And even among those 12, he had a mini group of 3, Peter, James, and John. And it appears that even for Jesus, there are some defining marks of friendship. And if friendships can change your future, it feels like having friends and having the right friends is of utmost importance. So, what is the work we need to do to choose wisely who we allow to have direct access and influence in our lives? If my friendships can change my future, what work can I do today to live in the purpose that God has called me to? So before we even begin to talk about the qualities of good friends, I think we must start by defining our friendships. The Cambridge Dictionary defines a friend as a person who you know well and who you like a lot, but who is usually not a member of your family. So as we begin this process of defining friendships, I'd like to share this visual on the slide, on the screen here. I want you to think of these circles as your groups of friends. The innermost circle there, the darkest blue, is your deepest friendships. Shared vulnerability, trust, accountability. Farther out might be friends who come to your house. Maybe they even have refrigerator rights. These are your good friends. One more circle out, and we might see like your hangout friends. Another circle out may be the friends you like to chat with, maybe even your work relationships. And then we might have the farthest out circle, and those are maybe your like nod and wave that, point kind of thing. Your circles might have different names, and you might do some other variety of this visual aid, but what I want us to track together on is the concept of the circles and how each circle is marked by differences. Here's what I want you to understand about friendships. Not everyone should get the privilege of being in your inner circle. Not everyone should get the privilege of being in your inner circle. Everyone is eligible for God's love and grace. Everyone is eligible for your kindness and respect, but not everyone is eligible for the inner circle. Your inner circle are the people who have the most access to you and the most influence over you. So you can see that those inner circle folks, if you choose wisely, can support you toward your success, can support you toward living on purpose. But if your inner circle are people who are wicked, the proverb tells us you will be led astray. And the biblical definition of wicked isn't limited to like murderers or quote unquote really bad people, right? We're talking about anyone who is actively or passively working against the will of God, rejecting God's holiness. If you have some people in your inner circle who are preventing you from walking in your God-given purpose, or perhaps don't even know that you are aiming toward living on purpose and in your God-given purpose, you likely need to redefine your relationships with them. You might need to start creating more space between that particular friend. You might need to put more boundaries on where you go and what you do. They might need to be gently and appropriately pushed to an outer circle. You might need to find some new friends who should be in that inner circle. And this will change where you go and what you spend your time doing. You might start coming to small group every week. You might ask someone to meet with you regularly to talk about the Bible, to talk about life. You might ask someone to hold you accountable to not being on the internet late at night or not going over to that guy's house late at night. And as we consider our future, we begin to redefine who gets to have access and influence in our lives. Who do you want to be? And what do you want your future to look like? Because your friendships can change your future. And while that may feel like a charge to younger folks, like you might be saying, oh, Shannon's doing like a nice little teen sermon for our high schoolers. Can I just say to the adults and the older adults in the room, as we get older, I think we tend to forget how influential and important our friendships are. Just because you've been best buds since you lived across the street in 3rd grade doesn't necessarily mean that he should still be in your inner circle. Let us not hold so tightly to the nostalgia that we allow certain people to influence us toward a lesser version of who we're called to be, especially if you've been radically changed by the love of Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean dropping people or blocking them from your phone, but this does mean taking a measured, communicated approach to aligning your friendship circles in such a way that motivates you toward looking more like Jesus Christ. Defining our friendships doesn't stop once we graduate from high school or college. So don't check out, adults in the room. And so once you've defined or redefined your relationships, once you've determined who gets to have access and influence, then you need to be prepared to develop real relationships. And this again, I'm talking to everyone in the room, adults especially, because I think we sometimes stop developing real relationships as we get older. According to Washington Psychological Wellness, real friends celebrate your success and offer comfort during tough times, fostering a space where you can be your authentic self without fear or judgment. I would add to that and I would say real friendships are marked by things like joy and fun and adventure, as well as vulnerability, conflict, hurt feelings, on-record apologies, and forgiveness. Your inner circle friendships should challenge you to work through a host of interpersonal relational issues that you don't run from and you don't ignore. That you don't run from and you don't ignore. Here's what I mean. You mean to tell me you've been friends for 10 years and you've never had a conflict? You've never had a real disagreement? And I'm not talking about just being unable to agree on where to go for dinner. Listen, when it comes to your closest friends, I think there should have been some stuff. I'm not talking about toxic manipulation or craziness. I'm talking about there should be challenges and tears perhaps and painful moments. But on the other side, there is deeper friendship. Friendship is deliberate and chosen. Family relationships will push themselves on you. You're stuck with them. Your family will always be connected to you, even if it's just in the most basic ways. You usually can't get away from them. But friendships show up as unique. C.S. Lewis writes in his book, The Four Loves, "Friendship is born at the moment when one man says to another, 'What, you too? I thought no one but myself.' This is the moment where friendship is created. But it's not enough. The conditions for building on friendship, as described throughout the Proverbs, and I want to highlight 3 qualities of friendship. Now, I said earlier that I'm specifically zeroing in on Christian friendships, the importance of who is in that inner circle and who has access and influence in your life, because your friendships can change your future, remember? And as Jesus followers, we want our future selves to reflect us as growing more and more to look like Jesus. But these 3 qualities that I'm about to share, these are 3 qualities that work in any type of friendship. 3 qualities to look for in a friend. So the first quality to look for in a friend is constancy. Now, this is different than just being consistent as a friend. This is constancy. Constancy and consistency, they relate to stability and reliability, but they differ in their focus. Consistency emphasizes regular, predictable behavior or performance, while constancy emphasizes unwavering, unchanging qualities, particularly in loyalty and affection. Proverbs 18:24 says, "There are friends who destroy each other, but a real friend sticks closer than a brother." A friend will not let you go to ruin. A true friend shows up and sticks to you even when you're a mess. A true friend comes to get you out of the bar at 3 a.m. when you're not where you're supposed to be. A friend knows what's going on and shows up with a meal and then folds your laundry. A friend will be your loudest cheerleader and the person who pulls you aside when you're acting a fool. A friend's presence is marked by their attendance at your kid's birthday party, the hospital, your retirement party, the funeral of a parent. Constancy. Take a moment to think about your own life. Who shows up in the movie reel of your life? Who shows up for you even when it's inconvenient or expensive? Constancy. A second quality of friendship that you should look for is candor, the quality of being open and honest in expression, frankness. Proverbs 27:5 says, "Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." Friendship says, "I love this person enough to tell them about themselves so that they can stop making disastrous decisions." If your friends aren't candid with you, the depth of the friendship is diminished. Accountability is diminished. Your growth is diminished. For the sake of becoming more Christ-like, we must have friendships marked by candor. And I think most people just do a poor job of being candid. A lot of us are Midwest nice. We're too nervous to share how we really feel. We lack courage. Or we've made it difficult for people to be open and honest with us. We've responded so poorly that even those who love us the most refuse to be candid with us. Are your closest friendships marked by candor? As you reflect, do you think you're the type of friend who encourages others to be candid with you? Being candid with others, that takes courage. And receiving candid feedback, that requires a lot of self-awareness. It requires you to keep your mouth shut sometimes, right? But it's a mark of true friendship when you can openly and honestly share, when you can be vulnerable, when you can be accountable. That's candor. A third quality of friendship is counsel, advice, especially that given formally. Proverbs 27:9 says, "Perfume and incense brings joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from their heartfelt advice." A mutual sharing of advice and counsel, recognizing we are better together. We need each other. Getting the feedback and advice from someone who loves us and is for us, not because they're related to us or they need us, but because they have chosen to be our friend. It's like when a parent compliments their kid and the kid replies something like, "You have to say that, you're my mom," right? But when a friend says it, or when a friend recommends something, then all of a sudden it's believable. The counsel of a friend, it means something. And in the case of a Jesus follower, it's especially important to have the counsel of a wise, Jesus-following friend. This is the person who will encourage you to listen to the Holy Spirit even when it doesn't make sense in the natural. Or the person who will hold you accountable to confessing your sins so that you can experience the freedom that you desperately want. The person who will remind you of your talents and purpose when you seem to have lost your way. Or the person who will remind you to be humble when you're too proud of your talents and your abilities. But the counsel of a friend is also recognizing the tension of ironing, sharpening iron. The clash of it all. Proverbs 27:17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." The shared affinity, but also the differences, the equalizing of ideas and accountability and strengthening, the ways our friends help us see things from different perspectives and because of different lived experiences. This is the counsel of a friend. And these are the three qualities I want you to look for in a friend: constancy, candor, and counsel. If you find someone who has these qualities, you should cling to them, appropriately cling to them. Not just so that you can make friendship bracelets or have cool Instagram photos, but because your friendships can change your future. But here's the challenge with finding those types of people. You ready for this? This is the challenging part. We aren't generally the type of friends we need to be for others. As you consider the qualities to look for in a friend, we might need to start by turning inward and examining our own ability to show constancy, candor, and counsel. We fail to be constant. We show up poorly or we don't show up at all. We choose our own comfort and keep things light over candor. We unequally give or take advice and counsel. We're busy, we're tired, we're inconsistent, we're moody. Frankly, we're just sometimes really bad at being a good friend. But we're not hopeless. And finding the types of friends who will positively shape our future, it isn't a lost cause. Because we can start here, in this larger community, this church family, koinonia, Love University, as we like to call it here at the SSV. And then we take specific steps to make this large gathering a bit smaller. So this is just one example, though. You can also find beautiful pockets of Christian friendship in other areas. At my job, there's a group of employees who meet every Wednesday to pray and talk and develop friendships. That's a place to meet new friends. My mom has been a part of Bible study fellowship since I was in elementary school. That's another place where you can find friends. You can join a gym like CrossFit, or you can join a running club. That's another way to find friends. I've talked about this before, but I have a running buddy, Jody. To be more accurate, Jody is a runner, and I sometimes plod along with her when she's 15 miles in, and I say, I'll catch you at miles 16 through 19. And I look back at my text, and I found out that Jody and I first arranged to run together. Our very first run, we texted each other on February 14th of 2016 to set up to run the next day. So for almost 10 years, I've been running with Jody. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but Jody also loves Jesus. So we started running together, and we started sharing more and more about our lives. And over the seasons, we have just continued to run together. We've run together in the rain and then heat. We've run regularly and multiple times per week, and then sometimes more sporadically. We've cried on our runs. We've laughed on our runs. We've shared deep thoughts and deep hurts. We've even had a few disagreements. But running with Jody is important to me. We've also shared the story of this church plant and the original 11 adults and 2 babies that started this church with us. Most of the people who are part of the original church plant team, they were originally part of our small group back in Champaign-Urbana. And now we are a group of 26 adults and kids, and we have been through some stuff together. Lots of fun, lots of work, some disagreements, lots of apologies, lots of love. These friendships have changed my future. What about your own life? If your friendships can change your future, like let's just say if that were to be true, you might not believe me, but if that were to be true, because I think it is, are you satisfied with who you've chosen to give the most access and influence to? I'm going to pause because I want you to really think about that question. If it's true that your friendships can change your future, are you satisfied with who you've chosen to give the most access and influence to? Is your inner circle of friends the type of people who are for you and for your future success? Or do you maybe need to redefine some relationships? Shuffle some things around a bit. If you call this church home, this is a great place to start as you define your relationships. But this is the large group setting. When you're ready to commit to going deeper, that requires a different kind of effort. It's then that you start looking for the deep, meaningful friendships that come when you engage in a relationship marked by constancy, candor, and counsel. So what steps, small steps, big steps, what steps could you take to start creating a community of friends? Maybe you already have an idea of how to form deep friendships. Maybe you're a great host and you can open up your home for like Sunday lunches or with a group of friends. Maybe your next step is to text 1 or 2 people and ask if they can meet for coffee. What about finding someone with shared interests, like pickleball or eating at obscure restaurants or crocheting or running or music? Sometimes defining and developing deep relationships takes some time. Sometimes you try and it turns out to not be a great fit. And that's okay. You just got to keep trying. I'm going to share kind of an embarrassing story here. A few years ago, I was on a trip and I met a person through a mutual connection, and like we had a great time together. She was super fun, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I want to be her friend. Like, have you ever had that thought? Like you hung out with somebody and you're like, I want to be their friend. Well, she lived far away, and so I said to her, I was like, hey, we should connect. Like, what if we did like a Zoom once a month where we just kind of got together over Zoom and hung out, talked a little bit. And she agreed, and so we set up a Zoom, and we did the Zoom meeting twice, and it didn't go well. Like, it was just kind of awkward. The connection that we'd had in person, it was just kind of like flat. And I was like, oh, this would have been so great, because like she's a woman pastor, I'm a woman pastor, we're going to totally connect, we can talk about all our problems. But it didn't end up that way. It just sort of flattened out. It was fine, she was fine. But I think she was just too busy, right? And I felt sort of deflated. I felt kind of vulnerable for trying to get her to be my friend, but it just didn't work. And that's kind of how it ended. No more Zooms, and I haven't seen her in over 4 years. Now, fast forward to a couple of years ago, and I went on a retreat with some other women pastors, and I really connected with this other woman. She's also a pastor in a different state, and she was great, and we had so much fun on this retreat. And she reached out to me after the retreat, and she asked if I would be willing to connect once a month on Zoom. And do you know what? I thought about the previous example, and I also realized I just did not have the bandwidth to do this. I was relationally at my capacity. And I knew, because I remembered how much courage it took for me to ask this other person to meet once a month on Zoom, I knew that it took a lot of courage for this person to ask this. But I also knew that I just didn't have the capacity to develop this friendship. And so I had to have this difficult conversation with this beautiful, lovely friend that I just didn't have the bandwidth to develop a friendship with her, and she was hurt. And I felt bad, and we talked about it. We had a really candid discussion about it. And we text every once in a while now, but we don't meet once a month via Zoom, even though I'm sure her and I would be great friends if circumstances were different. So I just share those stories because sometimes I think you put yourself out there and it just doesn't work. And that's okay. But don't stop trying to form deep friendships. Attend different small groups. Go to different events. Invite people to go with you wherever you're going. Find your people. It takes practice. Not just practice for opening our physical spaces or by inviting people to do stuff, but it also takes practice to show up ourselves with the qualities of a good friend: constancy, candor, and counsel. But as we pursue Christian friendships, we lean into that, wait, you too, that C.S. Lewis describes. And when we find that rare person or people whose deepest affinity to love God and love others matches our deepest affinity to love God and love others, on top of all the other connections we can make, we're truly blessed. Worship team, you can start to make your way up. Where does this connect with you today? For my teens in the room, as you're developing relationships and friendships, have you considered how your friendships can change your future? For my adults in the room, as you maybe feel more static in your friendship circles or with the relationships that you have in your life, are you willing to define or redefine your friendships? Recognizing that some people shouldn't have access to the inner circle of your life. I also recognize in a room this size that there might have been people who have come in with broken hearts about past friendships or even current friendships. I believe that the Lord wants to do a work in your heart to bring some healing. I remember thinking in high school, when you go through that drama with friends in high school and you have, maybe that's just mostly girls, but I feel like there's drama in high school with friendships, and you think, if I can just get past high school, adults don't deal with this stuff. And then you get past high school and you realize adults totally deal with this stuff. And it doesn't really stop. And we have to commit to friendships. We have to commit to defining and redefining our friendships. We have to commit to going deeper into developing those relationships where we allow people that access and that influence to us so that we can look more like Jesus. Would you stand if you're able to do so? When I was working on this sermon earlier in the week, I had the title in mind that your friendships can change your future. And Gino and I had a conversation, and he was like, that's kind of a long title. We've been choosing the little punchier titles. And I said, no, I think this has got to be the title, because I want people to walk away today feeling and hearing and like remembering this line, because I really believe it. I feel it even more now than I did earlier in the week when I was working on the sermon, is that your friendships can change your future. And I'm not saying that as like a bumper sticker, right? I'm saying that as like I feel like Jesus is really specific about this. And I don't think that this is something that we can just be apathetic about. I don't think we grow out of this concept. And I feel like the Lord wants to do some work in this today.